Our next panel topic, ladies and gentlemen, is maneuver to destroy with fires, extending range and survivability. To moderate this discussion, we have Major General retired John Sonny Uberti, U.S. Army Military Affairs Executive for RTX. John is responsible for fostering trusted relationships with U.S. Army leaders and policymakers to deliver shared value in support of the U.S. Army and RTX objectives. Major General Uberti joined RTX as the Director of Fires Capability before Raytheon's merger and with United Technologies, and post-merger led the global customer account for U.S. Northern Command, U.S. Strategic Command, and the Americas for Raytheon's missile and defense. In this role, he led a team responsible for growing and maturing our strategic defense solutions and guiding the company's sector strategy. Prior to joining Raytheon, he was a senior principal with the McChrystal Group. Prior to his transition with industry, he served in the United States Army, retiring at the rank of Major General. He earned a master's degree in national security and strategic studies from the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and a bachelor's degree from the United States Military Academy at West Point. John, Sonny, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks for that very kind introduction, Les. Great to see you again, General Smith, and great to see so many former Army colleagues and see so many great industry colleagues, partners in many of the efforts that we're working on to help the Army as it's on this great modernization path. It's my privilege to represent RTX and our three businesses, Collins Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, and Raytheon. And we have I'm joined here by a very distinguished panel. Many of them need no introduction, but we're going to spend some time introducing them anyway. To my left is Brigadier General Rory Crooks, the director of the Long Range Precision Fires Cross-Functional Team. Those of you or those of us that have been privileged to serve with General Crooks know that our Army's modernization effort in the fires domain is in great hands with him. He's got a deep fire support and field artillery experience, having served in armor, striker, and soft formations. He's the former commander of the 1st Infantry Division Artillery, and has been at Fort Sill for a while now, and all of us are feeling his presence and experience. Many combat deployments and work at the training centers, both the dirt and the simulated training centers. So General Crooks, thanks for joining us. We're also joined by Lieutenant General retired Dick Formica, 36 years as a fire supporter and field artilleryman, former 3-Corps artillery commander, commander of Space and Missile Defense Command, and also the director of force management in the Army G357. Did that job for about 3.5 years, knows a lot about our force structure, where we were, where we are, and how difficult it is to get to the future, because it's more than just about material. He's currently serving as the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at CALIBRE Systems. And we're also joined by another distinguished field artilleryman and fire supporter, Jim Miller. Jim's the Vice President of Business Development for Combat Mission Systems at BAE Systems. He's been with them for 10 years, brought to that company a great wealth of experience, former commander of the 1st Battlefield Coordination Detachment, has got time on the Joint Staff as a director in the Joint Operations Directorate for European Affairs, so very familiar with current environment. And to echo something that General Retired Morgan said when he brought up here, yeah, I really do want to tip my hat to the men and women in uniform, those of you that continue to serve. What you're doing is hard. It's hard. And every night I go, whew, this is really hard. And then I go to sleep because I know you're out there putting a lot of intellectual and physical energy behind some of the toughest problems. So thanks to our men and women in uniform for all you do, and that extends to our allies and partners, because we couldn't do it without you. We've talked a lot, on this modernization path that the Army's been on, and some of the future concepts about multi-domain operations and cross-domain operations. And I think we all recognize that every domain that we operate in is contested, congested, and more competitive than it's ever been before. And that's pre-conflict and conflict. And so, today we want to get at, on this panel, as General Brooks mentioned, how does this notion of maneuvering fires come into play as we think about multi-domain operations? And so, traditionally, as several have mentioned, we always thought about fire and maneuver. And now we're talking about maneuvering fires, not necessarily a new concept, but has really taken on some great importance. And so, General Crooks, I was wondering if maybe you could share with us, as Army Futures Command and the Fire Center of Excellence and the CDID, look at current and emerging threats, the future operating environment. What's changed that's causing us to talk more about maneuvering fires?
Hey, sir, thanks for that question. I'll start off answering it by taking a step back here. I don't know how the inner workings of AUSA operates now, but I do remember having a conversation at the end of the fire symposium last summer with General Formica, and it was, hey, this idea of offensive and defensive fires integration. We've been here before, and really, what's old is new. I tend to agree with them for many reasons, but what's old is new is probably a degree. It's a matter of degrees, and it's a matter of degrees in terms of scale and in terms of speed. And hopefully, I'll be able to kind of lay that out for you. So, if what's old is new, we've been trying to see farther since we incorporated the very latest technology. I mean, you can go back as far as the Civil War. We were trying to incorporate balloons to see farther. When it comes to aviation, when aviation was introduced at the turn of the 20th century, we figured out ways of to see farther with aviation. In fact, for those at Novacell, you might not know that the first home of Army aviation was Fort Sill. It was for that purpose. And if you've been on the polo field, they actually constructed a biplane and took it off there. Didn't go so well. Actually, there were casualties, but that was where it was born. And we were trying to adopt new technology to help us see farther. Some of the things we're using today have been around for a while. We've had satellite imagery. We've had U-2 flights, overflights. We've had predators, since these capabilities came into being. What we're doing now is learning to leverage these in ways that gives us better access to their data. If there's any change in the degree of speed and scale, it's the degree that we have access to the data from some of these platforms. And it's not just any platforms. I think we've grown comfortable probably in the last 5-6 years of saying any shooter any sensor best shooter, the right C2 network. Really, once we get access to the data, that's going to take us from any sensor to all sensors. So when we can take and ingest all sensor data and layer that data together, we can do things with it that we couldn't do before. And I think what that allows us to do is see further across more of the electromagnetic spectrum than we ever have before. But before you get too comfortable with us having that ability, remember our adversaries have it too. Our enemies have that same capability. So what that means is that we're always potentially in contact in ways that we might not recognize. And that has changed in the operational environment. If we're always potentially in contact, then that means everything we do must be more deliberately thought out. We have to deliberately maneuver our fires into position so that we can achieve a position of relative advantage. That's not something that we've really had to think about, in just a generation ago. It's something we have to think about today. Now, if you hear General Rainey, Army Futures Command, Commanding General, he will say that the land component is part of the joint force, And positioning matters. So what we do to deliberately position our fires into a position of relative advantage absolutely matters, whether you're at the theater level, you're at the operational level, or the tactical level. And why you maneuver to these positions of relative advantage is so that you can engage at the maximum possible range. So thinking back that the adversary has just as much access to data as deep as he can, then the way that we leverage this, get ourselves into position of relative advantage with our fires, that is the key to taking the initiative. Whoever does that successfully first allows that commander to shape and gain the initiative and retain the initiative. So I've got a very simple chart I'm going to pull up behind me. Now, most charts are really elaborate. You got to stare at them for a while. I went for the other end of this. This is so really 3 pictures here. But in all seriousness, the simplicity is just to highlight what we're trying to achieve with positioning our fires so we can attain local range and mass overmatch. So look at the top of the chart. That's status quo. You know, it's traditional. Used to be FM 1-02, where you have the enemy is the red diamond and the friendly is the blue icon. That's all that is, and that's status quo at the top there. But what we do and will do, and now into the future with deliberately positioning our fires, is we gain that position of relative advantage so that we can maximize our range to get that overmatch in terms of range and mass. And that is sort of not new. There's not that much new about it. What we have to do at the same time where that yellow arrow is we have to survive. That might be a little bit harder than it's been in the past. So to survive and exploit that position of relative advantage, we have to maneuver with protection. Now think that through a little bit. Maneuver with protection almost simultaneously, right? We have to, as we maneuver and as we attain that position of relative advantage, we have to hide below a noise level, an ambient noise level. Why? Because if you have an anomalous signature of any kind, that is what AI machine learning is going to pick up on, and you will be the #1 target with your anomalous signature. So hiding below a noise level that has no anomalous signatures, and then continuously moving. That is something that is always hard. And as we tee up later on the panel, that is something that we're coming to terms with. What is movement? Especially when it comes to surface fires. We know that we have to emplace, we have to fire, we have to displace, and resupply much more quickly than we have before. We have to do it at short halts if it's resupply, rather than these traditional 2-hour, rearm, refuel, refit, survey point sort of R3SP operations we've done that take 2 hours sometimes. That's a huge target to present to an enemy for days on end, and we're just not going to survive that. So what we do to consolidate gains includes bringing that protection with us, includes incorporating and gaining some kind of information advantage in terms of deception, in terms of adding to that noise level by our own movement. That is all part of what we do to consolidate gains, because until we consolidate gains and bring up our logistics, right, reposition our logistics, until we do that, then we can be worn down, eroded. The enemy's going to do the same thing to us as we're going to try to do to them with maneuvering their fires. If we don't have protection to prevent that from happening, then we're going to find ourselves back to status quo with nothing to show for it but lost resources and potentially lives. So consolidating gains in real time also involves making sure that resupply logistics is a forethought. It happens during future operations planning to the same degree that we've all been comfortable if we've been on staffs at brigade all the way up to get a log stat, logistics status. That's insufficient. That's current operations. And if you're out of position, you're going to find out really hard that the ammunition, for one thing, the class 3, the petroleum is not going to be where you need it. You have to think through, and maybe some of the decision aids we've talked about in previous panels are going to help us put that into the forethinking, put that into future ops, so that we can do this at a speed we haven't seen before. When you consolidate gains, by the way, as a joint force, That's what I consider. I haven't seen really good definitions of pulsed operations yet. I'm sure they're out there in the JP, so don't correct me. They're out there. But pulsed operations to me means the ability to fire and maneuver and then consolidate gains very quickly. And I'm worried that as the speed of large scale combat operations accelerates, the operational pauses between those pulsed operations is going to get smaller. So that's where we have to be a little bit faster. So just to recap, what is old is new. I think it's a matter of degrees. What I think is new and different potentially is the scale at which we can access data from our sensors deep, and then the speed with those short operational pauses always being in motion. That might be what's different as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for those insights, General Crooks. And you hit on really a number of different things that, for our industry partners out there, and maybe I'll turn to Jim Miller on this. General Crooks talked about survivability, talked about mobility, talked about access to data, talked about massing, in-placing, displacing. So as we think about what might emerge from a concept or a thought to a requirement, what is industry or what is your team thinking about in terms of how do we leverage innovative technology, advances in manufacturing to address some of the things that General Crooks mentioned?
Some great questions there. And I think, at least in our company, and I'm sure many of the other companies look at a close relationship with the Army to start understanding the problems of the future battlefield and where to go to help with that. And what we've tried to do is, probably like many companies, have tried to anticipate some of those requirements that are going to develop, try to suggest back to the Army where we think they can make some progress. And we have a pretty thorough approach to that, I think, that helps us think that through. So maybe I just hit on some of that a bit here as we get started. As we look at the trends in warfare, and I think, General Crooks did a pretty good simple depiction of what we can expect out there. Speed of warfare is increasing exponentially. You really can't understand it, I don't think. It's amazing how fast things are going to turn, especially when we start to get autonomy engaged in warfare. Our enemies will have fewer human interventions than we do, which will challenge us in speed. We mentioned already the problems with concentrating to get anything done, concentrating in the same position, and how dispersion is becoming more and more important. And how do you get that with artillery systems and your whole fire support system? And then the big A word, attrition. We're seeing huge attrition on the battlefield in Europe right now, and it challenges everything. And so should we be looking at not just economies of precision versus mass, but are there requirements in our future that talk about replaceability and how easy or difficult it is to replace systems you're going to lose? So that kind of as a background, maneuver and survivability and your range fire, everything you just mentioned, sir, are completely tied together. And we all know that the elements of combat power best work when you're being collaborative and getting them all together, synchronized. We took that approach, but really focused on survivability and kind of broke out. If you're taking our targeting approach and you're our enemy and you're looking for us, looking to kill us, what are the steps you go through? And if you go through those steps, you kind of get an idea of what you need to do to counter that and where these future requirements are going. But the first one is you don't want to get hit, and you don't want to get hit. So you got to prevent being seen first, right? That you got to prevent them from finding you, and keep the enemy from detecting you. You want to do that as a maximum range you can. Those ranges are continental ranges now. They're impressive ranges, and so you get into General Crooks hit on it. You get into the offensive side of which being offensive and proactive works best in protecting your location. But so you're looking to detect the enemy's ISR, his UAS, understanding what the HBTs are that you have to attack those long ranges. And long ranges are really long now. And we're talking, we've talked about tube artillery shooting ranges out at those IRCA ranges and beyond. missile ranges extending, across the continent, things like that. But really, the requirements around platforms of signatures, visual signatures, heat signatures, electronic signatures. General Crooks mentioned a lot of these. We've got a lot of vehicles with crew devices on. I hate to turn one of those on in certain battlefields. You just become a target if you accidentally turn it on. So what do we do about that? And then as we begin the maneuvering of our fire support system, what are the ways that we maneuver differently of those fire systems assets? And things like, do we use autonomy to clear position areas ahead of us? So robotic systems that are out there doing, ground clearance, ground reconnaissance, perhaps establishing initial air defense so we can move in underneath an umbrella. So those are interesting. You want to prevent the enemy from locating you. So we talk about being agile and mobile in your fire support systems and moving. And we talk about emplacement and displacement times, but we also are seeing new fire support systems. The Army just tested a mortar system that shoots on the move. Should we be moving that way and not sitting still to shoot anymore? And those capabilities are coming around. Should we be using more decoys? Should we be working more camouflage? We were talking about camouflage nets before the panel. We're not going back to camouflage nets, but what is the camouflage we need, and how do we do that? Once the enemy sees you, he's got to recognize you as enemy friendly, target, not target. You get back into the camouflage decoys, you get into masking systems. There are vehicle masking systems now, and system masking systems that actually change your appearance under certain sites. Do we want to look at those? And then once the enemy does identify you and he's starting to think about you as a high priority target, what do you do to self-defend? And we talked in the earlier panel about counter UAS. We talked about platoon leaders having their own UAS, their own response for counter UAS. Do they need their own loitering munitions? What do we do about counterfire? Is it just the old radar identifies you, the artillery shoots you? Or is it the loitering munition finds you and everybody piles on? So those things are pretty interesting. And then the non-traditional role for artillery. We're seeing efforts, and we got to give credit to the U.S. Air Force. The Air Force said, "Can we go back to the days when a cannon artillery piece shoots down air threats?" And we're working on that now, and autonomy has made that possible. So those things coming. And then the last bullet we hit on a bunch of times. I just like to beat it to death. I've been doing it since I was Wolf 7. We've got to execute this kill web faster than anybody else. And we all talk about that. I can remember the briefings at Fort Sill when I was Wolf 7 saying 22 minutes from target ID to target attack. We will lose the war in 22 minutes if that's what we do, right? So how do we do that faster? Because once you get behind, you can never recover. And so how do you retain the initiative? And autonomy, and the previous panel talked about autonomy supporting that decision-making. I'm starting to think of it more and more as autonomy recommends, much the same way as AFATAC recommends a firing solution and the FDO goes, that's good, right? And fewer human interventions, more of a recommendation than here's how you make a decision, make a decision. So with that, I'll stop there and kick it back.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And yeah, I appreciate you pulling in your experiences of Wolf 07 because I think there's probably some experiences all of us have that Wolf 07 shared with us that are probably relevant today. And so as we think about the changing operational environment, this idea of ubiquitous surveillance and always being in contact, and then some of the technologies that you and others are bringing to the fight. I was wondering, General Formica, if you wanted to share, given your experience at the brigade, division, corps level, what are some of the experiences of the past that we need to bring forward to bridge between these new concepts, this new operating environment that we find ourselves in, and the technological solutions that might be out there?
So thanks for that question. It's appropriate for me to get. I want to borrow a line from General Crooks. If what's old is new, I'm old and he's new. So you heard him talk about all the new, and what I hope to do with my few minutes is try to be the context person and talk about a little bit about where we were and how you'll see some of the similarities to where we think we're going. And just as I'll try to sprinkle with some anecdotes as they become appropriate. But I was sitting here listening to these two distinguished gentlemen to my left and right, and I remembered that in 1999, then Lieutenant Colonel Gary Cheek was a battalion commander, adjusted live fire field artillery on the postage stamp impact area at Fort Stewart, Georgia, under a UAS. That UAS out there, 1999, adjusting live fire. And here we are now just really talking about how are we going to exploit UAS and other systems, and how are we going to be protected from the bad guy doing the same thing to us. 1999, 25 years ago. So whatever we do is we're maneuvering, or excuse me, firing to support maneuver or maneuvering to support fires. My sense is we have to remain true to our roots, and starts with fire support is what we do, right? We're all about providing massed and precision fires for the maneuver commander so that we can provide them fires where they want them, and more importantly, when they need them. That's what it's all about. We've traditionally used fires to allow a maneuver to get to a position of advantage. Now we're talking about maneuvering fires to get fires to a position advantage, but it's all about range. If you've ever been a platoon FDO, did you ever remember when the first fire mission came in, you put the pin in the chart next to the RDP and you said alpha range? It was all about making sure that you were in range to hit the target. So what's old is new. And we've done this before. Now, we didn't do it in the kind of scale that General Crooks is talking about going forward, but we have maneuvered to position fires in order to optimize their range throughout our careers. We've maneuvered to conduct deep strikes at the division and corps level. We've maneuvered fires and provided security for FA and MLRS raids, and we've used maneuver to bring short-range air defense forward so that we could protect our critical nodes throughout the depth of the division battlefield. We talk about increased mobility. It wasn't all that long ago, right? Our artillery pieces were in the wood line in static positions, firing and being exposed to counterfire. But we knew that wasn't the future, and we went to Paladin and then Paladin PIM so that it would have the same mobility and better protection and could keep up with our maneuver partners. We did the same thing with our observation platforms. We went to Bradley Fist, right? All about increasing the mobility and the maneuverability of our fire system. And I think that's what we're talking about, continuing that as we go forward. You've heard lots of talk about offense and defense integration. It's not a bad word. It's not code for merging branches. It's about getting synergy from both our offensive and our defensive fires. It's why, by the way, the 88 schools moved from Fort Bliss to Fort Sill. It wasn't just some BRAC efficiency. It was about getting synergy between offensive and defensive fires. We use offensive fires to reduce the threat of long-range missiles that are coming in at us, which reduces the requirement for our interceptors to have to intercept them. And we position defensive fires to protect our high-value assets like our long-range fire systems. We depended on rapid offensive maneuver to keep the enemy moving back and out of his range so that we could continue to move our artillery forward and get in our range. We had to take out his eyes, and now that really means for us, and you heard General Crooks refer to it, how do we mitigate or reduce our electronic signatures so that we're not vulnerable? We'll continue to do proactive and reactive counterfire, and we'll continue to and expand how we integrate lethal and non-lethal effects, cyber, EW, and space. And that requires, as you heard before, integrated planning. We can't have stovepipe cells and boards. As we look at organize going forward, how will we organize or task organize? to obtain the optimum synergy between offensive and defensive fires? What's the relationship between SHORAD and DVARTIs? What are the roles and functions of our theater fires commands, AAMDCs, and BCDs? We've got multi-domain task forces to employ and what they will teach us about the integration of offensive and defensive fires. And then I'd like to finish with a thought about leader development. We no longer can have fire support positions as the entry-level positions for our lieutenants, captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels. They've got to go in the firing battery, learn their skill, become expert field artillery officers, and then get promoted to the fire support positions at the company, battalion, and brigade level. I tried to carry that forward during my career, and just to make the point, Major Jim Miller was a battalion XO that excelled as a battalion XO, and was promoted to brigade FSO. Back at a time when everybody was wringing their hand, oh, never get promoted. We did that with 3 majors. They all got promoted. They all commanded battalions, and they all retired as colonel. So it's a system that works, and that's where our leader development needs to go. If you listen to the way we're going to fight that General Crooks was talking about, probably more important than ever. And then institutionally at the Fire Center, are we developing field artillery and ADA officers, warrant officers, and non-commissioned officers who first and foremost understand and are proficient in their branch and learn how to gain synergy between offensive and defensive fires? So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks very much, General Formica. Good rundown and pulling together the DOTML PF implications of maneuvering fires. I'm going to turn now to a couple of questions from our audience here, and I'm actually going to pull two of these together, and it revolves around artificial intelligence and the implications for range, survivability, and mobility, and it gets at how do we leverage that to impact the kill chain, shorten that time on the kill web, allow better detection of targets at greater ranges, be able to engage them, and then protect ourselves, survive for the next mission. So, General Crooks, maybe I'll turn to you first, as you talked about artillery always being in contact, or really Army formations already always being in contact.
That's all like a whole bag of questions there, but I'm glad to unpack it. So I think what I'll make is a distinction first about AI and machine learning and the idea of autonomy, because sometimes we conflate these a little bit. What we do for artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think there's absolutely a place for it. And I'll kind of speak to that. I'll touch on it a little bit here, but in panel 4, for those that are going to stick around, we'll talk a little bit more in depth on it in panel 4. But I think let's just talk fundamentally about what AI and ML does, and arguably better than humans, is they are not really bound by, we talked cognitive biases on one of the questions in previously. AI machine learning is not bound by any evolutionary survival biases, right? So you're going to have machine solutions that come up with, and they'll understand patterns in ways that we just cannot understand how they got there. But the patterning is actually superior in some ways than humans, but they're terrible. AI machine learning, maybe in the future that'll change, probably not. They're terrible at context right now. So humans are much better at contextualizing, certainly better at instinct, certainly better at interpreting human-driven behaviors in ways that we can take advantage of that. So that's what when I say AI ML, I'm talking about how you allow, it's still going to take a human or a staff to frame the problem for AI and machine learning, because until you frame it, you don't know what data is relevant. I talked about getting data. You need relevant data, relevant to solving a specific problem for a commander. So let's set that one aside. Autonomy, we're talking about speed and really how you leverage autonomy in ways that help you survive because of your mobility. Autonomy will help us also exceed the bounds of human limitations today too. Why? Because autonomous, and we're getting better at the maturity of these systems, but autonomous systems don't have to rest for 8 hours at least of the 24-hour cycle. They can continuously move. And as long as you provide them power, do some maintenance on them, they can continuously move. So autonomous solutions will help us stay, or at least add to the clutter that an adversary is trying to make sense of to prevent you from becoming a target. So with, I think I'll save to the second panel I'm on at panel 4 about how we're going to use AI and machine learning, particularly when it comes to PED, processing, exploitation, dissemination. It still takes a human to understand what is going on to initiate that kill chain in some ways. I think that's where they're going to expand our capacity for PED, AI and machine learning will. But when it comes to survivability, I think that autonomy is going to help us continuously move, do things differently than we do today, exhibit patterns that don't make any sense, that make it hard for an adversary to make sense, right? So that's where we're going to leverage those. And I'll probably speak to more of those later this afternoon.
Thanks, General Crooks.
Can I just add a thought
Please.
on AI? And I'm the least technological capable guy in this room, so I'm a little hesitant to talk about AI. And I appreciate your comments about AI is really just going to make humans, allow them to make decisions better. But when I think about the fire support system and I think about AI, it strikes me 3 areas where AI, as we develop things going forward, where it might help. 1, targeting, and you talked about PED. 2, airspace coordination, challenge we've wrestled with forever, and how AI can help enable that. And then 3, logistics. And for those of you that have been there at 2 o'clock in the morning when Gunny's doing the 5th ammo count in the last 6 hours, because we never got the charges to match the rounds, maybe AI can help us with that.
Yeah, thanks, because none of us have been out there in the middle of the night with a red lens flashlight counting projos. So, Jim, please.
The other thought just about autonomy is as we work autonomy into the systems, as General Crooks describes, he's exactly right. The autonomy is going to give us those capabilities. What us as humans and as soldiers are going to have to get used to is being comfortable with that autonomy. And so the process of learning and getting soldier feedback and unit feedback is going to be critical in that autonomy development and trust. And it's going to be a big step for some of us to move from, we still fire a howitzer with a length of rope, to a howitzer that roams the battlefield by itself and is capable of firing by itself. That's a big step for us to go through. And we've got to make sure we lay out a very detailed plan to get us all, industry, the Army, our units, comfortable with that.
If history's a guide, our soldiers will become much more comfortable with that far sooner than our non-commissioned officers and our officers.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, not to put you on the spot, General Crooks, but maybe describe to us how not only the long range precision fire CFT, but really Army Futures Command is leveraging the know-how and innovation of our soldiers to solve some of these problems.
So what we attempt to do, and even since I took over as the director in 2022, as General Rainey came on board, the idea of not just highlighting the Big M signature modernization efforts, but really transforming formations. I think he's taken the chief's guidance to heart, and really, what we do with engagement at the soldier level, it really matters, for one thing, and how we're doing it is different now. We had soldier touch points. We've always really appreciated the value of what we called soldier touch points in the past, but those were episodic, and as soon as we left, we didn't see the same soldiers again. We would maybe get a different sampling. It just didn't have the continuity. What we're trying to do now with unit transformation is to provide a capability in the hands of soldiers. So some of these autonomous systems, I'll probably talk more of that on panel 4, but getting them present in a formation and letting a unit tell us what it can and can't do. And in periodic engagement with that unit, it brings us back to the same demographic that they're sampling the data from, but they are being able to show us, especially the younger ones, what we can do with this technology that we probably couldn't have come to our own conclusions with otherwise. So that is what is exciting about unit transformation. We're doing it not only in the fires warfighting function, but across the board. And I know General Sylvia is probably going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon. Over.
Thanks, General Crooks. Again, just maybe pulling two questions from the audience together here. So, we talk about move. We've always talked about move, shoot, communicate, or really shoot, move, communicate in the artillery. We want to, from your graphic, we want to maneuver fires to a position of local superiority. As we think about some of the extended range munitions that are out there, either the ones that are currently fielded and being used, or some of the future munitions, whether that be PRISM, long-range hypersonic weapon. How do you see, and even for cannon munitions, right? So we've heard many Army leaders talk about innovating at the round, right, as part of the ERCA capabilities, the extended range cannon artillery, capability set. So not only for you, General Crooks, but really, Jim, maybe you can weigh in on this as well as, what does range give the fires warfighting function in terms of maneuvering fires, and why is that so important?
I think I'll tee it up and then pass to my panel members on this. Remember what fires are meant to do. Joe Formica talked about fire support, how important that is, how important it is to bring the science into the art, and that art is really solving problems for a commander at maximum possible range. So when we're trying to solve problems at maximum possible range, some of those problems will be ones that you can solve quickly with a precision munition. All right, it could be a point target that, hey, this is a one fleeting opportunity where that number one high payoff target presents itself. And that is what we can and should dedicate those limited numbers of very precise, exquisite, expensive munitions toward. Then there will be other problems we try to solve for a commander that involve mass, right? And what we do with area target engagement, again, the farther out you can engage, the more decision space you've left your commander, right? And if you can reduce coalition of forces and means down to something that will make the direct fire fight easy, again, talking about we don't want to fight a fair fight at the direct fire level, then that will require some mass fire, some area target engagement that aren't as exquisite, hopefully not as expensive. What we do for that, I think you're going to balance that and solve probably a couple of distinct problems.
I think there's a lot of places to go in this one. I think there's a couple things about range versus precision and mass fires that General Crooks just brought up. One of the challenges we introduced with extended range is that magnification of a CEP, right, or a target location area that gets you're shooting 100 kilometers. You can all do the mill relation filter in ahead. So you get to that induced. Where is the precision system in a contested environment good enough to even do that mission, right? And does it have to be masked because of that? You're going to get close enough and put a ton of rounds on them. So those things become an interesting new challenge. It goes back to, the comments I made earlier about counterfire and things like, do we throw up a loitering munition and we break the normal tradition of using artillery to attack artillery to get after some of those problems? So new ways of doing things. I think my job is interesting in that I get to do this fire support stuff with the Army. I get to do it with the Navy as well. And the Navy's challenges are somewhat the same, somewhat different. But systems that the Navy has used and developed that we could take advantage of on the Army side, whether they're rockets and missiles, missile launch systems, even some of the Navy ammunition they use in their guns. Do we need to go through the developmental process if we're aligned well with our joint brothers and sisters and we can develop things together? And I think there's some real opportunities there as well that we ought to be looking at. But the challenge is really around range and your decision-making on what type of engagement to make is no different than what I remember as being a brigade FSO, where I was attacking a target and what's the best thing, right? And it might be a scout with a sniper rifle, right? It is the similar decision we made. How do we make that now in that high-speed decision-making kind of cycle that I talked about earlier? And how do we use things like autonomy, going back to your previous question, or AI to help us pre-identify potential target locations, things like that, that help us get after that faster. Really, kind of a complex set of things there, but interesting to see that we are making, I think, good investments. We have organizations like the Strategic Capabilities Office we talked about in the previous panel. RICTO's picking up some of that now. That's really starting to look at what can we learn from other services, what can we do to take advantage of some of those capabilities and really push out those ranges and make sure we can engage at the distances we want to.
Sonny, if I can just add, this after you heard alpha range, the next thing you heard was alpha deflection, because accuracy is important. It doesn't matter if you can range the target if you can't hit the target. So you've got to have both range and accuracy. We talk about the balance between precision and mass, and that's really important going forward, because how you're going to expend those expensive, exquisite, precise munitions. But you can also be precise even with what we call the legacy traditional dumb munitions. And so you want to be precise with your exquisite precision munitions. You want to be precise with your legacy dumb munitions, and then you want to mass to kill the target with precision. Over.
And just to one more allusion to another panel that's coming up, you're going to have Brigadier General Kane Baker from Future Vertical Lift Cross-Functional Team up. He's going to talk about launch defects and what are these and what do they have to do with fires. That's going to be the focus of that panel. But I will say that between the balance of area target engagement, massing, and point target engagement precision, there is something that for those that are citing sources, if you're writing an SRP, strategic research paper or something like that, you got to cite your sources, right? Michael Kaufman, I think, is the one that said it, but we now, with the advent of one-way attack UAVs, loitering munitions, we'll just call them drones, we have the ability to now have massed precision in ways that we didn't potentially before. And I think that's, again, just a teaser for the panel 4.
Yeah, great point about, massing of fires and massing effects without massing formation or things enhances survivability. And I'll let you talk about that more on panel 4. General Crooks mentioned something about, ability to in place, shoot, displace, and then maneuver or move with protection. I have a couple of questions here from the audience. Asking about our observation and analysis of ongoing operations in Ukraine, the operating environment, and as we think of fundamentals of artillery, reconnaissance, selection, occupation of position. So, what technological advances or what technology do we see out there that might help us do that differently to, one, ensure survivability so that we can shoot, and 2, enable us to maneuver or move on the battlefield. Now, I'll really throw this out broadly to the panel. Jim's just nodding. So go ahead, Jim. Why don't we give General Crooks a break here since he's got another panel.
So the old idea of RSOP is interesting. When I mentioned earlier that there's potential now that we don't have to send a party forward to do that. a party of humans, right? We could have a party of vehicles that are maybe robotic or controlled, remotely, that could go do some of that reconnaissance for us and reduce the risk. I think the other idea is we get to the firing platforms that are able to disperse more and operate on their own more, beyond even what we do with the current howitzers. You start thinking of RSOP differently. Maybe it's an individual vehicle problem, right? They have to be able to manage that themselves as opposed to the battery commander or a platoon leader or somebody trying to do that. And so autonomy gives you the capability to do that. And the good news is that, if you have a fully autonomous howitzer, it's low risk to human beings if they're going into a position that hasn't been properly reconned ahead of time. So that's good news. I mean, if you're in that situation. But I think the autonomy really could help you there with that. And it could be air, it could be ground vehicles that go in and do and then could we get to the point where the vehicles that go in remotely or autonomously and do that RSOP type of activity for you, could they then provide local air support, air defense for you as your systems move into that location? I think that's something we should consider as well. It's as we start to see kind of back to General Brooks talking about common platforms, we're seeing the RCV guys in our Army go to more of a common platform approach there. And what are the various payloads and mission payloads we want those vehicles to carry? And maybe that's just part and parcel of what a battery does in the future, is they manage those things. So I think that's my initial thoughts on that one.
So here's a stray volt. We've already evolved from the old traditional RSOP back in the day when I was a lieutenant to the kinds of position areas that we need now for Paladin PIM. It is already an individual howitzer platoon kind of problem. But as we evolve to this maneuvering our fires, and we have howitzer or firing platforms that are even more agile and more mobile than we have today, what role will a maneuver commander play in position selection for the fires that he or she is charged with positioning? And what do they need to understand? What leader development are we teaching them? What do they need to be looking for? How can they find that spot, make sure it's cleared, and enable that firing unit to occupy that position?
And I think just to highlight and reinforce what Jim just talked about too, we're seeing it definitely when it comes to RSOP and maneuvering fires. The whole panel's focus was maneuvering fires. Then a maneuver force is given the task of clearing a PAA. They're going to do it with autonomous aerial systems first, probably autonomous ground systems second, and then with crewed systems third. So our PAAs will have been cleared 3 times. We've never experienced that before. So with cleared PAAs, what does that allow you to do? The ground threat is minimal. The air threat is very high. It's only going to get higher in the future. So, but it allows you to spread out, because spreading out and dispersing allows you to mitigate both, right? It allows you to not present a clustered target that will be rich for either surface fires or air target or first person view drone to attack. But allows you to maybe attain, especially with autonomous systems that are all connected, attain the ability to mass from distributed locations. So that, I think we're going to see more of that coming in the future with autonomy.
Yeah, thanks, General Crooks. We're coming down towards the close of the panel. I have two questions here from some of our media partners for General Crooks. That'll give the other 2 panel members a minute to get their thoughts together for wrap up. So the first question for General Crooks from Matt Beinart from Defense Daily. Has the Army completed demonstrations with all the vendors selected for the future Cannon Artillery Roadshow? And what did the Army learn from those demos, and what are the next steps?
Short answer is no. The performance demonstrations are still ongoing, and I'm probably going to defer any really detailed questions to PEO Ground Combat Systems. They're the ones that we have team members from the Fire CDID, the ACM Duvarty, our long-range precision fire cross-functional team that are part of these, as well as ATEC, the Army Testing and Evaluation Command. But there were 5 vendors that were part of this performance demonstration to get us the ability to understand the state of the industry when it comes to mobile tactical cannons, and that's still ongoing. It'll be concluded by the end of this month. Our last vendor. What we're seeing out of that, just atmospherics. This isn't rigorous analysis done on this, but is that so far the vendors that we've seen are absolutely ready for competitive evaluation. In terms of the platform, in terms of what we think will become our desired characteristics as we refine capability documents for this, requirements documents, that is. I think that we're very pleased with what we're seeing so far, and even some on the autonomy side. Speaking of autonomy and resupply and some onboard automation, difference between autonomy and automation is, when you think automation, think like of a vending machine, right? Something that could very quickly help you load your ammunition, resupply your vehicle. That's automation. That's more of what we're focused on with this performance demonstration to help us set the right conditions for a competitive evaluation.
Thanks very much, General Crooks. And then another question from one of our media partners here, Ashley Roke, is that correct, from Breaking Defense? A previous slide listed PRISM, Precision Strike Missile Increment 5. What is the plan, the capability, and the timetable, and is there funding in the program objective memorandum?
That is in science and technology at this time. So the PRISM Increment 5, what we're going to see, I'll show some pictures in panel 4 with platforms that can help us employ things that might be larger than our traditional multiple launch rocket system MLRS family of munitions. So if you're familiar with an MLRS pod, it's about 13 feet long. If you have something without a cab that's autonomous, you might be able to employ something longer than that. Later down the road, as we're in the science and technology phase of something that we'll maybe eventually call Increment 5, you might be able to employ something that's actually longer than an MFOM pod, and you might be able to achieve ranges that right now don't seem realistic. That's what we're leaving ourselves open to for this. So there's no timeline, but it is programmed in terms of science and technology.
Yeah, thanks, General Crooks. We talked about a lot of different things here today as we were thinking about maneuvering fires to extend range and survivability. And as we wrap up, I was wondering, Jim, if you had any thoughts on, from an industry perspective of where we need to go next, or what do we think the big challenges or the big ideas are out there?
Yeah, I think we hit on many of the big ideas that are out there, and the survivability is going to be a key one for us. And what the challenge really is one of understanding how that transforms into requirements that industry is going to go try to achieve for the Army. And in the past, we've defaulted to something as simple as, it's got to be as survivable as the Bradley fighting vehicle, or, as the M109. And we're now talking about systems that have a different set of requirements for survivability, right? And are we talking about, force protection for the crew, which is one thing, and then survivability of the system, it's kind of against what threats? If you're very mobile, do we make trades that say, I'm going to trade some of the weight of armor for the speed of movement? And those are the things I think we're kind of in the next step probably of working through. And I think, just to encourage us all to think about that and work that through carefully. And with that, I just close by saying that we have a really good relationship, I feel, between industry and the field artillery community in the U.S. Army. And we have great crosstalk and great alignment and great opportunity to just almost study things together and exchange ideas very frequently. And I think we've got to continue that in order to make sure that, we go back to the first panel, make sure the investments go in the right place. And we're not, we're listening to Guy Yelverton, whoever tells us to invest. because we understand what's important to him, and we can convince our leaders that that's an important thing for the company too.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And I agree. Just a great partnership between Army Futures Command, the team at Fort Sill, the Army and industry. General Formica, any thoughts on?
Yeah, thanks. First, I'd like to thank AUSA again, Army Futures Command and the Fire Center of Excellence for coming together and hosting this hot topic. It's been really helpful just in the first half, and we've got a whole afternoon to go. Thanks for your leadership of the panel. General Crooks, clearly you can tell the brains that we built the panel around. But the comment that I would close with is for the first several years of the Army modernization priorities, all of our discussions focused on M, almost to the exclusion of a lot else. And we found that materiel was getting out in front of DOT, small m, LPF. I applaud the way that this particular hot topic has been pulled together, because from General Brooks's opening comments and both panels so far, there's been a lot of dot mil PF discussion. Started with the concept. We did talk material, but there's been dot mil PF throughout. And I applaud the CFT and the Fire Center for allowing that to continue, because that's what it's going to be all about. If this isn't integrated at dot mil PF, we're never going to provide the solutions that we've been charged to provide. And ultimately, this is all about our soldiers, our field artillery and our air defense artillery soldiers, and those that they support and the families that enable them to serve. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I'd like to add my thanks as well to General Brown, General Smith, and your entire team, and to Army Futures Command and the Fire Center of Excellence. And General Crooks, you're one of the reasons why I sleep well at night, having listened to you a little bit today and previously. So I'll turn the floor over to you to kind of wrap up how all of us can help you and your team as you take on some really tough work.
Well, thanks, sir. I'll start by giving a return on investment that the Army did in my professional military education at the Command and General Staff College. Are we in the middle of a revolution in military affairs? I just don't know. All right. The short answer, it's really hard to tell when you're in the middle of it. But if there is such a thing, if there is a distinction between an evolutionary change in the character of war, not the nature of war, we might be in that. And if it is a revolution versus an evolution, it might be in terms of speed, because that seems to accelerate, and how you quantify that distinction is probably whether or not you define whether we're in an RMA right now or not. It certainly looks at, as year on year, as the observations or insights from Ukraine show us, that we might be in the middle of a revolution in military affairs, but it'll be a matter of degrees. And it really comes back to, again, as they started, what's old is new, except for the fact that the scale might be greater. And as we get into something even more large scale combat operations, even more so than what we see in Ukraine, that will tell us whether it's a revolution or an evolution, but certainly the speed at which all this is going to take place. And again, the speed comes back to the data, the access to the data. If you remember when Army Futures Command stood up, the #1 modernization priority at the time was long-range precision fires. Our chief has not forgotten that. Our chief has looked at what are the prerequisites to enable joint kill chains and kill webs to be executed faster. You have to have the prerequisite of a network that can transfer in real time or near real time all the data we need to be able to get faster. So that was really dense. Appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to panel 4.